Northwestern Croatia, 1998. A fragment of femur bone, smaller than a human hand, sits under a halogen lamp in the Zagreb Institute for Quaternary Paleontology. It is 32,000 years old. It belonged to a Neanderthal woman, and the people who extracted its DNA did not yet know what that bone would eventually prove about the end of her entire species. Before this goes any further, the number, 2.7%. Not a plague death rate, not a war casualty figure. The decline in fertility, specifically in Neanderthal women under 20 years old having their first child, sustained, unbroken, across 10,000 years. That number, according to peer-reviewed demographic modeling, was sufficient to erase 300,000 years of Neanderthal survival from the Earth. But here's where it gets strange. That number is smaller than the margin of error in most opinion polls. It is a statistical whisper, and it ended a species. Dr. Anna Degioanni had spent years at Aix-Marseille Université in France building exactly the kind of model that could answer this question. Not looking for a catastrophe, looking for a minimum viable decline. The smallest possible shift that could, given enough time, end everything. In 2019, her team published their results in PLOS ONE. They ran dozens of extinction simulations using stochastic, age-structured demographic models built on living hunter-gatherer populations. The San people of southern Africa, indigenous Australian communities, Arctic ethnographic records, combined with what the Neanderthal genetic record could tell them. An 8% fertility decrease triggers extinction within 4,000 years. But 2.7%, barely visible in the data, does it in 10,000. Every competing extinction theory, Homo sapiens aggression, climate collapse, disease transmission, requires a catastrophe. Something that leaves a mark in the archaeological record. There is no catastrophe in that record, only a slow, invisible arithmetic, which means the thing that ended Neanderthals left almost no evidence, which means we almost didn't find it. The last confirmed Neanderthal site, Zafaria Cave in southern Spain, dates to approximately 35,000 years ago. The woman whose jaw was found there may have been the last Neanderthal generation we can trace. No evidence of violence, no disease markers. She simply had fewer daughters than her great-great-grandmother did, and that was enough. If you've ever actually wondered where your biology really comes from, not the family story, but the documented genetic answer, subscribe. Because where this episode is going, most channels won't follow. 98% of the global population should carry no Neanderthal DNA at all. The fact that you, if you're of non-African descent, carry any whatsoever means that one window of contact opened, briefly, between 50,000 and 40,000 years ago. What happened inside that window is why the next segment begins where it does. Shanidar Cave, northern Iraq, 1960. Ralph Selecki of Columbia University uncovers something that would ignite a 60-year academic argument. A Neanderthal burial with concentrated flower pollen surrounding the body. Whether that burial was intentional, whether it means what some researchers think it means, is still debated. But the survival of that Neanderthal community in the Zagros Mountains through multiple glacial cycles is not debated at all. These were not struggling people. That's what the record keeps saying. And the record keeps getting ignored. Professor Ludovic Slimak at the Université Toulouse III in France led an international team whose work appeared in Cell Genomics in September 2024. Their genomic analysis of the Grotte Mandrin site in France reveals Neanderthal communities that maintained long-term genetic and social isolation, surviving, adapting, and persisting across glacial and interglacial cycles with no demographic support from neighboring populations. They were not being sustained from outside, they were sustaining themselves. We inherited a picture of Neanderthals as primitive failures. The genomic record builds a completely different portrait, a species that survived repeated ice ages, megafaunal collapse, and geographic isolation, not through expansion, but through extraordinary local resilience. They were not struggling to survive, until, suddenly, they were. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what the failure narrative predicted. At Vindija Cave in Croatia, genomic analysis identified a Neanderthal community of no more than a few dozen individuals, likely related across multiple generations. These were not a dying people with visible wounds. The genetic record shows stable diet, no epidemic markers, continued tool production. The extinction was not visible from inside it. This is the part that changes the question. Not when Neanderthals disappeared, not where. How does a functionally healthy species with 300,000 years of survival data begin to fail on a demographic register so small it was invisible to everyone, including themselves? The Neanderthal lineage is assumed to have ended 35,000 years ago, but if you are of non-African ancestry, between 1 and 4% of every cell in your body contains Neanderthal DNA. The lineage did not end, it dissolved into ours. And some of what dissolved may be doing something in your body right now. Aix-en-Provence, France, a computational biology lab, 2018. Dr. Degioanni's team is not looking for a catastrophe. They are looking for a threshold, the minimum biological shift that could, given enough time, produce total extinction in a species that has shown no catastrophic signs. What they find is in a population they did not expect to find it in. Young women, under 20 years old, having their first child. The model is built entirely on female demographic rates. This is not a methodological choice, it is a mathematical requirement. The reproductive bottleneck of any population flows through its females. Male rates mirror females in the model. The data structure reflects biological reality. If you want to understand when a species stops replacing itself, you look at who is doing the replacing. Think about that for a second. A Neanderthal girl, 17 years old, the Rhone Valley, 38,000 BCE, carrying her first child. She is not aware that across the next 3,000 years, if just 2.7 fewer girls out of every 100 in her situation do the same, her species ends. She is cold and tired and alive. The arithmetic running beneath her life is completely invisible to her. Every extinction model before Degioanni focused on adult survival rates, climate disruption, or interspecies competition. The finding that the critical variable was first-time mothers under 20 was not anticipated. It reconfigures the entire question. Neanderthal extinction was not a population crisis in the general sense. It was a generational one. The species was failing at its entry point, at the moment of its own renewal. In large mammal populations studied today, wolves, great apes, large ungulates, primiparous fertility is the first demographic rate to decline under environmental stress. It is the canary in the population. Long before adults show signs of collapse, the youngest females stop reproducing at the rates that sustained the group. The Degioanni model draws this parallel explicitly. The Neanderthal decline may have been a biological stress signal that no one, not even the Neanderthals, could read. Because it was happening in the bodies of their youngest women. Quietly. Slowly. For 10,000 years. What causes primiparous fertility to decline in a population with no visible epidemic, no starvation signal in the fossil record, no evidence of direct conflict? The model identifies the mechanism. It does not identify the trigger. That gap between how and why is where the most dangerous finding in this story is waiting. The Neanderthal genomic record at Vendiga Cave dates the last Neanderthal DNA in Europe to approximately 39,000 years ago. The last Neanderthal stone tools in Spain date to 35,000. That 4,000-year gap, a period in which Neanderthals appear in tools but not in bones, is unexplained. The species was leaving evidence of its presence while leaving no evidence of its bodies, which means we may be calculating extinction from the wrong endpoint. And if we have the wrong endpoint, do we also have the wrong cause? For 70 years, the dominant academic narrative positioned Homo sapiens as the extinction agent. The mechanism shifted. Warfare in one decade, disease transmission in the next, resource competition in the decade after that. But the defendant never changed. In 2019, the demographic modeling changed the defendant. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. Professor Christ Vaesen at Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands and his colleagues published a parallel demographic analysis, also in PLOS ONE in 2019. Their finding? Random genetic drift alone, without any contact with Homo sapiens, without climate disruption, without disease, could account for Neanderthal extinction in small, isolated populations. Homo sapiens were not a required variable. The math worked without us. Think about what that means. The species you were taught killed the Neanderthals, your species, may not have needed to do anything at all. The extinction was already arithmetically possible from within. This is not exoneration through insufficient evidence. It is exoneration through mathematical irrelevance. The Neanderthal population dynamics were already capable of producing extinction from the inside, with no external accelerant required. The Vindija cave Neanderthals show no epidemic markers, no nutritional collapse, no violent signatures in their skeletal material. Their last centuries were not dramatically different from their prior millennia. They did not know they were ending. The genomic record makes this particular silence unbearable to sit with, but the exoneration creates the most dangerous version of the question. If Homo sapiens didn't kill them, and climate didn't kill them, and plague didn't kill them, what caused a 2.7% decline in teenage fertility rates, sustained across 10,000 years with no visible origin and no recorded memory of its beginning? The accepted model positions Neanderthal extinction as something done to them. The demographic data inverts this completely. Neanderthal extinction was something that happened inside them, which means whatever caused it was intimate enough to be biological, which means it may have arrived through the most intimate contact Neanderthals ever had with another human species. Actually, pause for a second. I want to ask you something directly. If you've ever taken a DNA ancestry test, were you surprised to find Neanderthal variants in your results? And if you haven't, do you think you'd want to know? Drop your answer below. I read them. Because your answer is more connected to what's coming in this episode than you might think. Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, Leipzig, Germany, 2010. Svante Pääbo's team has just completed the first draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome. The finding that changes everything. People of non-African descent carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. The interbreeding happened. It is confirmed. What the 2010 paper does not answer, and what 15 years of subsequent research has been circling, is what that interbreeding cost the Neanderthals. What they found next changed everything they thought they knew about this. In 2025, a preprint posted to bioRxiv, not yet peer-reviewed, and it must be clearly stated as such, proposed a specific biological mechanism for the Neanderthal fertility collapse. Researchers examining genetic incompatibility between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals identified that hybrid offspring of sapiens-Neanderthal interbreeding may have experienced complications related to Rhd blood group incompatibility, a biological barrier, not a weapon, not an act of aggression, that may have made successful Neanderthal lineage continuation through mixed ancestry pregnancies progressively less likely. This finding has not been peer-reviewed, but the mechanism it proposes has been documented in living human populations for decades. What it describes is not a hypothesis about human biology. It is a known biological process applied to a context no one had considered. The genetic exchange between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals is typically framed as a Neanderthal contribution to modern humanity. Immunity genes, cold weather adaptations, neurological variants that living people carry and benefit from today. The 2025 preprint reverses the frame. The exchange may have introduced a biological incompatibility specifically into Neanderthal female reproductive outcomes. The gift flowed one direction. The cost flowed the other. In modern medicine, Rhd incompatibility between a mother and her fetus is a documented cause of pregnancy loss, stillbirth, and reduced fertility in subsequent pregnancies. Today it is manageable. Rh immunoglobulin treatment exists. Screening exists. In 40,000 BCE, it was not manageable. It was just a woman losing a child and not understanding why. If the bioRxiv mechanism is eventually validated by the field, it reframes the entire Degioanni fertility model. The 2.7% decline in young Neanderthal women was not random demographic drift. It was a biologically induced fertility collapse caused by proximity to the species that eventually replaced them. Homo sapiens did not kill Neanderthals. Contact with Homo sapiens may have made Neanderthal women biologically unable to sustain their lineage. If Neanderthal DNA in living humans is not neutral, if some of it codes for specific immune responses, specific neurological variants, specific vulnerabilities, then the question is no longer what Neanderthals left behind in us. The question is what we are still carrying from a reproductive crisis that happened 40,000 years ago, and whether any of it is still active. By this point, the thesis appears complete. Small population, demographic fragility, fertility decline in the youngest women, possibly amplified by a biological incompatibility introduced through interbreeding. The model is coherent, mathematically supported, and, crucially, it requires no catastrophe, a quiet demographic extinction. The case seems closed. Professor Vaesen's independent confirmation in 2019 arrived at the same destination from a different direction entirely. Demographic factors alone, small group size, inbreeding, fertility variance, sufficient to produce Neanderthal scale extinction with no external force required. Two independent models, same conclusion. The physical genomic evidence aligned. The Altai Neanderthals, sequenced by the Max Planck Institute in 2022, reveal a community so genetically isolated that individuals show elevated inbreeding coefficients, the genomic signature of a population that has stopped receiving outside genetic input. This is not extinction as catastrophe. This is a species beginning to close the door from the inside. Two independent models. Physical genomic evidence of population closure, a mathematically sufficient cause. The answer seems to be here. The music might soften, the case might resolve. Then the 2025 bioRxiv preprint publishes, and it does not offer a competing theory. It offers something more precise and more unsettling, a cause for the cause. The Degioanni model identifies the what, primiparous fertility decline. The preprint asks why that specific demographic, why the youngest women, why first-time mothers, why them? And the answer it proposes is this. The youngest Neanderthal women may have been the most likely to carry pregnancies with hybrid sapiens ancestry. Because they were young, because the interbreeding events were recent, because biological incompatibility is always most severe in the first pregnancy, before any partial immunological adaptation can develop. The demographic model and the genetic incompatibility finding point at the same women, at the same moment in Neanderthal history, from two entirely different research disciplines, one computational, one genomic, that did not design their studies to connect. That convergence is not coincidence. It is the shape of a cause we haven't named yet. The interbreeding events between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals left genetic traces in hundreds of millions of living people today. But the specific Neanderthal women in whose bodies this played out, the ones whose pregnancies may have triggered the cascade, have no names, no monuments, no recorded history of any kind. They are the demographic center of the most consequential reproductive event in human prehistory, and we don't know a single one of them. There is a moment in every extinction story when the cause stops being abstract. For Neanderthals, this is that moment. The genetic incompatibility proposed in the 2025 preprint is not a theoretical mechanism. RHD blood group incompatibility is a documented biological reality in living human pregnancies, a consequence of genetic distance between a mother and her fetus. The question is not whether the mechanism exists. The question is whether it operated 40,000 years ago between two populations whose genetic distance was far greater than exists between any two living human groups anywhere on Earth today. The Homo sapiens Y chromosome is absent from every Neanderthal genomic sequence recovered to date, every one. This has been confirmed across multiple analyses conducted by the Max Planck Institute's research group over nearly a decade. It is not a sampling artifact. While Neanderthal sapiens interbreeding did occur, Neanderthal male Y chromosomes did not survive into the modern human gene pool. The biological asymmetry of the exchange is documented in the genome. The cost was not shared equally. Everything I just told you? Hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. Homo sapiens did not destroy Neanderthals. Interbreeding with Homo sapiens may have made Neanderthal women biologically unable to sustain their lineage, not through violence, not through competition, but through the intimate biological consequence of proximity to a species whose genetic distance was precisely large enough to introduce reproductive incompatibility and precisely small enough to allow the interbreeding to occur at all. The species that contributed DNA to hundreds of millions of living people received, in exchange, a biological incompatibility that may have targeted its youngest women at the exact moment of their species renewal. That is not a transaction with a clean name. The English language does not have a clean word for it. A Neanderthal woman loses a pregnancy, then another. The community around her cannot identify a cause. There is no framework for what is happening. She is not being hunted. She is not starving. The world outside the cave looks the same as it did the year before. The extinction is happening in the space between conception and birth, invisible, unremarkable, irreversible. The genetic fault line between these two human species is not confined to history. Between 1 and 4% of the genome of every non-African person alive today contains the direct result of those interbreeding events. The Neanderthal women whose fertility decline ended their species, their biology is inside you. The question of what it is still doing there has not been answered. Leipzig, Germany, 2016. Dr. Janet Kelso's team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology has just published something the scientific community is not fully prepared for. Specific Neanderthal DNA variants in living humans are not neutral. They are active. Some influence how the immune system responds to viruses. Some affect skin and hair characteristics. Some, and this is the finding she will spend the next decade following, appear to influence susceptibility to specific modern diseases. The Neanderthal contribution to living human biology is not a relic. It is functional code still running. This isn't just ancient history. This is in your DNA right now. Kelso's research, published across multiple studies in Science and Nature between 2014 and 2021, identified Neanderthal-derived variants in living humans that influence pain sensitivity, depression susceptibility, and blood coagulation. These variants did not arrive as isolated inert segments. They arrived as functional biological instructions, code that Neanderthal women carried, passed to hybrid offspring, and which then entered the sapiens gene pool, where it has been operating actively for 40,000 years. If you are of non-African ancestry, between 1 and 4% of your genome arrived through a Neanderthal woman. The specific variants you carry from her, the ones shaping how your immune system responds, how you process pain, how your blood behaves, were preserved in your lineage while hers ended. The Neanderthal women whose fertility decline ended their species did not disappear without remainder. Their functional biology, active code, not genomic artifact, persists in living human populations today. The species ended, the biological contribution continued, which means the extinction was not total, it was selective. The Neanderthal genome lost its carrier. It did not lose its function. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a specific genetic variant associated with severe respiratory outcomes was traced to Neanderthal ancestry. A separate variant, also Neanderthal-derived, was associated with protection against certain infections. The women who carried those variants, the same women whose fertility decline contributed to species extinction, left their immune architecture inside people who lived 40,000 years after them, and in some cases survived a global pandemic because of it. And then there is the question the field is only beginning to ask, whether living women today carry a genetic trace not just of Neanderthal biology, but of the specific biological event that ended it. A variant present only in populations with confirmed Neanderthal ancestry, influencing reproductive biology in ways that current research is only beginning to characterize. If it exists, it is not history. It is a living document written by women who had no idea they were writing it. Before the final segment, one more thing I want to ask you directly. Whatever brought you to this video, whether it was curiosity about your own ancestry or something else entirely, I want to know, does it change anything for you, knowing that a biological event 40,000 years old may have left a traceable signature in living women today? Drop your answer below. The conversation there is genuinely worth reading. There is no grave for the last Neanderthal, no monument, no name recorded anywhere. The species that survived 300 millennia of planetary violence ended not with a catastrophe, but with an absence. A 2.7% absence repeated across 10,000 years of mornings that looked identical to the mornings before them. If you carry Neanderthal DNA, And if you are of non-African descent, you do. Then the women whose fertility decline ended their species contributed the code that is operating in your body right now. Not as metaphor, as measurable, documented, active biology. The question of whether you carry any variant of the specific incompatibility that may have caused that fertility collapse is a question that genomic research in 2026 cannot yet fully answer. But it is being asked in laboratories right now. The story of Neanderthal extinction is not a story about what happened to them. It is a story about what happened inside them, in the bodies of their youngest women, in the space between conception and birth, across 10,000 years of biological arithmetic that no one was recording. The extinction was not witnessed, it was inherited. There are, in the end, 3 things this research reveals. The first, a species can end not through violence or catastrophe, but through a number so small it is invisible. The second, the biology of that ending was carried specifically by the youngest and most vulnerable members of the species, women whose loss went unrecorded and unnamed. The third, the one that changes everything, is this. You are, in a measurable, documented, peer-reviewed sense, the continuation of something that officially ceased to exist 35,000 years ago. Their biology survived their extinction. It survived inside yours. If that question matters to you, if knowing where your biology actually comes from feels like something worth pursuing, the next episode goes somewhere this one cannot. The number was 2.7%. It has been 35,000 years, and it is still inside you.